So there's countless videos out there that will give you advice on where to land and why those certain spots are good, but not a lot of content provides you with the advice and tactics that apply to every landing spot in Warzone. It's all well and good knowing where to land and which spots are theoretically better than others, but you need to know how to get the most out of each location you're in, and how to do well in the beginning of the match generally. So I figured I'd make this video to help provide you with the gameplay advice you need to have success early doors in Warzone. I'll be breaking down my thoughts and tactics for landing anywhere in the game. I'll specifically be covering reading the drop, weapon play, and planning the drop itself. I'll leave timestamps to these sections in the description in case you fancy skipping ahead. These tips/tricks apply to all Warzone modes, so whether you're a solo or team player, there's definitely something here for you. Whilst every landing spot is different, you can sculpt these tips, tricks, and tactics to suit your needs, regardless of where you choose to drop. Wherever you land in Warzone, it's a game of getting good loot and dictating the engagement you have. Fortunately, there's a lot you can do to influence this. First thing I want to discuss is reading the drop. There's a lot to break down here, but the obvious one is watch where enemies are landing. What isn't obvious to a lot of people is to make sure you know what their next move is going to be. Now, if an enemy lands on a high building, logically, they have to work their way down to loot up. If they land at a central building, the next move has to take them towards the outskirts. If you're a competitive player, you need to keep a mental track of where you think the enemy is going to be. I know you can't dictate exactly what's going to happen, but you can make an educated guess as to their route. This is crucial to having success wherever you land. It allows you to predict gunfights and set yourself up to have an advantage early doors. If you know that certain buildings have popular spots to camp out, such as rooftops, balconies, or ledges, then you should prepare for there to be players here. A key bit of advice from me is to set a mental stopwatch. If you know an enemy or enemies are nearby, it's all but inevitable that you're going to run into them. Give yourself a set portion of time to loot up, then go in for the gunfight. Reading the drop is all about understanding how the enemy is playing and how you should react. If you see a full team landing on a building, obviously don't go there, but you also shouldn't land where you want to fight them. Looting takes time for everyone, so there's effectively a short buffer at the start of a match when you're all scrabbling for weapons and little fighting is actually going on. You should land somewhere you can loot quickly, then move on to the place where you want to engage the enemies fast. This little window should allow you to move to a more advantageous position, whilst also giving you time to grab extra loot. If you land where you want to fight straight away, you're massively increasing your risks. You risk getting bogged down and remaining static for too long. If you don't get the optimal guns for your playstyle or location, then this can be the game over for you before it's even begun. Landing is a delicate balance of getting optimal loot and controlling the engagements you're in. This means giving yourself the best chance of getting decent weapons, but also being able to use them in an environment that favours you. A key part of reading a drop is being able to pick a spot that favours you. It needs to be a balance between loot, cover, and engagements. You want to be able to loot up a reasonable amount in as short a time as possible, while staying out of the line of fire until you're ready to deal with it. If you're playing with teammates, you have the added factor of dealing with where they land. You want to be landing close enough to cover one another and deal with any enemies, but far enough apart that you have enough loot to go around. Bear in mind that enemy players will probably also think like this, so if you come across one, there's bound to be more nearby. It's important to recognise though that you can't always win the drops. If you read the drop and see more players than you can handle, landing in the best buildings that doesn't leave you with a lot of options, then leave. Sure, it's fun to be the underdog and you will occasionally come out on top, but more often than not, you'll end up dead before you know it. If you're late to a drop, you'll end up looting whilst enemy players or teams are pushing out to find you. This means there's a high chance someone will come across you before you've had the chance to gather the guns you need to give yourself a decent chance. Plus, if you're super late, you could end up dropping into already looted areas, and then there's really nothing you can do. There's no shame in running away and heading out to a better location. It'll give you the chance to get prepared and then go out and get some kills, rather than being impatient and dying early doors. This brings us to section 2 of the video, and that's the weapon play and tactics to use in the initial drop areas. Gunfights in the first few minutes of the game are not like any other. You aren't going to have the ideal guns or equipment that you want to use, and you certainly won't have any loadouts. A big piece of advice that I'd offer here is to pick up guns that favour the immediate situation you're in. If you're in a built-up area, then keeping an SMG or shotgun handy can make a big difference. There's very little point carrying around a 50 cal sniper early game, as chances are you won't get the opportunity to use it. Pick weapons that are suited for the situation you're immediately in. If you happen to land in the middle of nowhere, then in this scenario a sniper is probably going to be useful, but the same applies to an SMG in confined drop areas. Don't worry about picking up guns that are ideal for late game scenarios, like thermal LMGs for example, as they won't help you in the immediate danger you're in. You can always go back and pick up the guns you want later, once you've dealt with any immediate threats. Early game requires a lot of movement in order to maximise the loot you can get, as well as to get optimal spots for dealing with enemies. For this reason, I'd specifically advocate carrying weapons that let you stay mobile. Snipers and LMGs generally don't let you do this, so I drop them early doors in favour of assault rifles. By the same token though, if you control the high ground in an immediate area, then having long range LMGs can be handy. This is another key point in and of itself: play to high ground. A general rule of thumb in Warzone is to keep yourself on the high ground, and this remains true in starter areas. Make sure you know where the high ground is and, if possible, work your way towards it quickly. There's obviously no point going there if you haven't got the weapons to make the most of it, hence the earlier advice of landing somewhere small first, then heading towards your ideal position. You're better off clearing out a location and then going back for what you want to carry on later in the game. The right mentality mentality is to adapt your playstyle to the guns at your location, not chasing specific guns that you may never get. If you have a shotgun, play buildings. If you only have a sniper, go for high ground out of sight. The point is to adapt. Early doors, it's all about fast reactions and quick gunfights, and you need to pick a gun that lets you do this, in whatever current situation you find yourself in. Another tip for early landing engagements is to make the most of whatever you've got to hand. Tacticals can give you a massive advantage early doors, so too can explosives or field upgrades. Just because you don't normally use deployable cover, for example, doesn't mean you shouldn't use it here. In the same vein, don't worry about saving stuff for late game, such as dead silence. You're better off using whatever you have to hand, so that you survive the initial firefights of a match. Remember that none of it is any use to you if you're left dead. Last, but by no means least, is planning the drop. Wherever you're landing, you should have a plan before you get there. Choose which building you, and your teammates if you have any, are going to land on. This will give you a clear loot path and clear strategy in case you run into any other players. Make sure you know where the high ground is in that area and where other players are likely to land. Take a look at the map early doors and check out important locations nearby. Buy stations are crucial, and you want to make sure that you're aware of where the nearest one is to you. If you have a strategy that's dependent on cash, then check out nearby contracts. You need to know what to do wherever you're landing, as running about aimlessly is never going to be the best option. Something a lot of people overlook is estimating where enemy players are going to be coming from. Plenty of teams will be doing the same thing you are, for each and every section of the map, but there's only so much loot to go around, and players will be moving from area to area. You need to understand where enemies are likely to enter your domain from, and keep an eye out for them. The idea is to avoid getting caught off guard whilst you're at your most vulnerable. If you're in a team or solo, you want to have a plan of what you're going to do before you get somewhere. Plan your loot path and know what your next state of play is before you make it. The very start of any Warzone game can be the most hectic of the entire match. You'll be dropping in with 100 other players, all fighting out over whatever resources you happen to find. Playing it smart is more important than ever. I hope this video gives you that edge in Warzone. Every landing spot is different, but you can mould these tips and tricks to help suit your needs on a case-by-case basis. These principles can be applied whenever and wherever you are in Warzone, and give you an advantage over all the other players who aren't considering this sort of thing.